I am Jay Stevens, a finance nerd who has used technology to improve financial processes for corporations for the past 15 years. You are ready to take control of your financial future so that you too can say, I am rich like my melanin. All right, y'all. I am Jay Stevens, the host of Rich Like My Melanin, and we are back with another episode of Everybody Knows Somebody Who Knows Somebody Who Knows Something About It, the series where I introduce you to entrepreneurs and creatives who can inspire you to manage your finances, start your own side hustle, or maybe just live life a little bit better, a little bit brighter. Today, we are speaking with Rahkim Sabree of Forbes, columnist and financial coach who focuses on the intersection of financial education and financial trauma as a barrier to teaching financial empowerment. I know I said finance a lot. If you're ever doing a drinking game, like you made finance the keyword, you're going to ruin yourself in this one. But we encourage healthy lifestyles. Right. Rahkim grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, and he embodies the idea that you don't have to succumb to your environment or the limitations of what you know. He often discusses the impact of his early experiences with poverty on his relationship with money, and he also likes to dive into the nuances of financial trauma, culture, race, and their impact on the wealth gap in the Black community. We're here for it, Rich Like My Melanin. His work has been published or seen in many large national and international publications, including Business Insider, Black Enterprise, Entrepreneur, Money Group, Rio, CEO World Magazine, Parents Magazine. Like I said, he's a Forbes columnist. Put the respect on the title. I personally met Rahkim through the FinCon community, and you see the perfect branding he has on the FinCon shirt right now. And I can attest to I know, I love it. Product placement, although they're not sponsoring this episode, but still.
That's right.
Product placement. I can attest to the impact and the fact that Rahkim is really chill, humble guy. He's usually the kind of person who can like be fine with being on mute and hanging out in the background and letting other people get the shine. But today we are putting the spotlight on him. If there was a spotlight, I would turn it. Maybe my editor will like drop a spotlight in on your face right now. But it's okay if you don't. My editor's amazing. Whatever he decides works. So first things first, let's just get, level set. We like to make sure everyone understands the topic. What is financial trauma? Where does it come from? Like, what are the red flags that you know what's going on? And why are we even talking about this? Like, why does it matter?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for having me. So financial therapy as a whole is an emerging field. And so there is no set definition of financial trauma that everybody agrees on, right? So I've been working with a definition that describes financial trauma as any instance observed or experienced that has a negative impact on the way that you view, interact with, or believe about money. And so I talk about financial trauma a little bit different than other people who talk about it in the space because I'm not just looking at financial trauma through a clinical perspective that says, okay, you're experiencing anxiety, you're experiencing stress, and these major flashpoint events, if you will, have caused you some kind of trauma. I talk about financial trauma through the lens of the Black experience as a subset of a larger generational trauma that has certainly impacted the way that we view and interact with and what we believe about money. And so that can and does come from historic and present day exclusion from financial systems, abuse within those financial systems that have created a warranted mistrust in the financial industry, like banking, insurance, et cetera. And I kind of talk about how we can navigate through those obstacles with acknowledging what the financial trauma is, but then also figuring out, well, how can we work, like through my own example, through the example of other people, how can we work through these issues? Before I learned what the term financial trauma was, before I stumbled on these different communities, financial therapy, financial psychology, I was just kind of talking about it very intuitively through the lens of my own experience. And you kind of touched on that in my introduction. But now I have a reference for vocabulary, a reference for research, empirical research, and clinical terminology and approaches to helping people heal from trauma. And so I love that. This is validating things that I knew intuitively, but didn't have the vocabulary to describe. And so why is it important that we're talking about financial trauma today? Well, there's a huge stigma within the Black community, specifically around mental health. And there is I would say some relative discomfort around the topic of money, right? We don't talk about money in the household. We don't talk about money with our families. We don't learn about money in school, at least not the way that we should learn about money. And so money becomes kind of a taboo topic. And when we combine both of those taboos or both of those stigmas, it creates kind of this avoidance or this internalization of whatever the negative feelings and emotions that we have when we hear about budgeting, when we hear about building credit, when we hear about planning for retirement, or even planning for death, right? When we look at, life insurance and the lack of participation in life insurance that Black Americans specifically have. And so we see the aftermath of that, who's left holding the bag, so to speak. Um, no pun intended. But like, are we doing the fundraising, the fish dinners? Like, what does the scrambling look like when somebody, suddenly, unexpectedly or expectantly passes away and, those funeral expenses have to be, picked up by somebody who's unsuspecting. And so normalizing these conversations has been, I don't want to say a mission of mine, but certainly something that I've been very intentional about because it shines a light on these are issues that we need to talk about, right? Like airing the dirty laundry, getting underneath the carpet and saying, hey, this is all the stuff that we swept under it. But in that, it gives me an opportunity to acknowledge that there are systemic issues that impact Black wealth, and so we can shine a light on that without being or without feeling defeated or without being a victim, right? So taking ownership of our circumstances and not from the perspective of, oh, we have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps because, I don't agree with that. But certainly from the perspective of how do we feel internally as it relates to empowerment? What does that mean for us? How do we redefine what wealth looks like for us? And in the process, have a very healthy relationship with ourselves, with our community, with our money.
I love it. It's like you knew what I was going to ask. It just got right to it because I did want to know, like, how does this relate to the Black community? Because it's not like it's just a Black thing to experience financial trauma, or even not trauma, just to understand and have a concept of money based on what you experienced as a youth. And whether that means you trust banks, like you said, whether you have insurance to be able to handle, because the fish fries are a real thing. There's always a fish fry fund somewhere, and there's always a building fund somewhere, even though we haven't even seen it like a doorknob change in the building. But that's not my church. My church knows what they're doing. But it is a good point of there are things that we are learned and taught and things we experience that even though they're just like subliminal, we don't recognize it, it plays into how we move forward as an adult. So with that in mind, when someone recognizes, this is trauma, I have a completely wrong idea of how to move forward with my money, what can they do? Like, how can they heal from it? I mean, I advocate for therapy. It's great. It is the reason why I have been able to forgive some people and move on with my life and forgive myself for things. But how do you heal from that trauma? Is it something where you can just read a financial literacy book? If you can do one of these, like, budget boot camps, and then you're back to 100%. And this is also a great time to let them know how they can specifically heal with you.
Yeah, no, I love this question. I have a million thoughts because the way that I define financial trauma is certainly challenged within the financial therapy community. When you look at the word trauma and its definition, and definitely the clinical approach to trauma, the way that I have created this very broad spectrum of defining financial trauma may not fit into that box very neatly. But I think that when most people hear me talk about financial trauma and they hear me define financial trauma in the way that I do, they start to have their wheels turn and they recognize, oh, hold on a second, like maybe I have some financial trauma. And I like to think, based over the feedback that I've gotten, maybe 99%, I'll be a little bit more generous, say maybe 98% of people who have heard me define financial trauma will identify that they have some kind of financial trauma. And to your point, it's not just a Black thing, and it's certainly not just a poor thing, right? There are people who have high incomes who are experiencing or who have experienced financial trauma. And so the first thing that people can do once they identify that they have financial trauma is, and this is going to sound super crazy, but I think celebrate, right? Celebrate that they recognize that they have financial trauma. Because when you hear that phrase trauma, or when you hear any kind, I mean, there's so many buzz phrases around, diagnoses, right? That alienate people or make them feel like, oh, I'm not a part of the mainstream, or, I have this issue, and I'm not remembering the word that I want to use right now. So it stigmatizes people, right? And they feel isolated. And where I think that there's an opportunity here, particularly within financial trauma, is that it can create community, right? Rich, poor, black, white, old, young, right? If we're experiencing the same thing, and we all have to interface with money at some points in our lives, right? We can kind of connect on the basis of the commonality versus on the basis of what our differences are. And so in celebrating, okay, I acknowledge that I have financial trauma. Now we can normalize conversations around what are the influences or what are the things that have happened in my life that have prompted this trauma. Does it have something to do with the way that I grew up? Whether I experienced poverty or whether I experienced privilege? Does it have something to do with the way that I came into money as an adult, right? So once you become an independent adult, you get access to credit, you get access to student loans, you get access to income through working. How did your early experiences influence what you did as an adult or what you do as an adult today? And then ultimately, how can we plan for a better tomorrow, right? So what are the steps that we need to take in order to address that this is what's influencing me in the way that I believe or in the way that I behave around the money that I command? And these are the steps that I want to take to change that. So I usually make reference to this framework that I've dubbed the 3 E's, right? That's exposure, education, and execution. And the exposure piece is really as simple as just acknowledging that something exists or becoming aware that something exists, right? So for me, that was going from living in an apartment on Section 8 and believing that because I was living in an apartment on Section 8 and this was what was normal for me, when I became an adult, I was going to go out, get Section 8, and live in an apartment. But becoming exposed to somebody who was relatively young within, my age range, who owned multifamily real estate, made my entire worldview go upside down. And I'm like, hold on a second, like there's an option here. And the option doesn't look like what it is that I experienced growing up. So then after that exposure piece came the education and figuring out, well, how do I make this reality a reality for me? And that process involved learning about credit, learning about the down payment programs, FHA versus conventional, how much money I need to have, who to talk to, what resources do I need to have aligned, and then the execution piece, which was the last piece and is the hardest piece, actually taking the step to decide, I deserve this, I'm worthy of this. My past experiences are not going to have an influence on my present day or my future. And I share this story very intimately because I remember having everything lined up. I had the pre-qualification, I had the real estate agent, I had the lender, I had the credit, I had the down payment. I'm ready to buy a house, but I'm deciding in this moment that I recognize that I had the exposure and the education, that all of the what if questions that are influenced by my previous financial traumas almost stopped me from moving forward because I was worried about, well, what is this going to look like in the future? This is different from what I know. And so community was a big part of helping me in the execution phase to remind me like, you're safe, right? I think that's super important to recognize your safety in the moment that you're in, to recognize what it is you're qualified, right? You have the money, you have the income, you have the credit, and you have the team of professionals that are going to help you out. So, fast forward, I ended up buying a house, multifamily real estate at 26 years old. And it was the best financial decision that I've ever made. And that was on the other side of that 3E framework. And there was one other thing that I wanted to share when you're talking about, I forget what your question was specifically, but you touched on like 3 different points, I think it was. And within that, give me a second, I just have to remember what you said.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Sure.
So I asked, how can one heal from the trauma, and will financial literacy alone fix it?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. There is an argument that more income will solve your problems, will solve, the issues of financial trauma. And I disagree with that. And we just recently saw in the media, Gabrielle Union goes viral for sharing on a podcast that her and B Wade split the bills 50-50, and everybody's going crazy over the 50-50 part. But they didn't listen to the ends of that conversation where she talks about, even as a multi-million-dollar actress, she still experiences fear, she still experiences scarcity, she still experiences the burden and the pressure of supporting households outside of her own. And when I heard those things, I immediately thought financial trauma, right? And you can't out earn what that trauma looks like. That trauma grows um, because your behaviors are going to be magnified, or your beliefs are going to be magnified based off of the amount of money that you are now bringing in. And so you grow to that income level, right? There are a lot of six-figure earners right now who are living paycheck to paycheck, not because, they can't afford to live the lifestyle that they live, but because they've grown their expenses so that they now can't afford the lifestyle that they live. And when I think about that argument that financial literacy is like the magic bullet to solve issues of poverty, to solve issues of financial trauma, to solve issues of financial literacy, what people don't realize is that there are a lot of financially literate individuals who are experiencing poverty. There are a lot of people who know what they should be doing, but choose to do contrary to that because they have to operate through survival, right? I know that I should only use up to 30% of my credit limit and then pay the balance off in full, but I don't have any food in the house, right? And so my children are hungry, or my children need clothes to wear tomorrow, clean clothes to wear tomorrow for school, or the light bill is getting ready. I mean, the lights are getting ready to get turned off. And so people make choices that are contrary to their best interest based off of their need to survive. And, there's scientific evidence that shows that when somebody is perceiving a threat versus actual like experiencing a threat, your brain cannot distinguish between the two. And so if there is a lion or tiger or bear standing in front of you, getting ready to like bite your head off, your brain reacts in the very same way as if you're experiencing this poverty and you don't know what tomorrow is going to look like and whether or not you're going to be able to have food. And in those instances where survival mode kicks in, your the part of your brain that's responsible for rational thought kind of shuts down a little bit and takes a back seat to the part of your brain that's responsible for fight or flight. And in that survival mode, because the part of your brain that's responsible for rational thought shuts down a little bit, well, you're not thinking rationally. And so, no, I think the answer to your question is that financial literacy, more financial literacy, and I'm growing to not really like the term financial literacy, but more financial literacy doesn't solve problems of financial trauma. And you talked about therapy in the beginning of that question, and I didn't realize that there's a lot of people who don't realize that financial therapy is a discipline, a new discipline, or I should say an emerging discipline that exists. And the Financial Therapy Association, and so that's financialtherapyassociation.org, has a directory of financial therapists out there who can help with financial therapy. And I'm not on that directory because I'm not a member of the organization. And I don't call myself a financial therapist, although certainly people have described me as such. I believe the work that I do is therapeutic. And I have a therapeutic approach to helping people move through their relationship with money, their beliefs about money, their behaviors around money. But I've kind of found more comfort in branding myself as a financial coach who offers a therapeutic approach to coaching or counseling. And right now I'm pursuing the accredited financial counselor designation, which also deals with the clinical approach to helping you set your goals financially, accomplish those goals financially, and education. So as long as people are checking off the boxes of having a mental health background in any capacity, having a financial background in any capacity, and they can back that up, then they can probably help you through those issues, whether they call themselves a coach, a financial counselor, or a financial therapist. And specifically as it relates to working with me, well, that's the structure I described, right? So I work with people one-on-one. I also work with organizations in a business to business capacity to come in, do consulting work around maybe standing up a program within their organization that focuses on financial wellness and being able to provide financial coaching or financial counseling for their employees.
I love it. There's so much in there. I'm going to quickly make sure that I repeat some of this to make sure people understood it and captured it. That was like the gym. I feel like I could just put up that response to that one answer. That would be the whole interview. But one, financial trauma, it is more than financial literacy, a term that you're moving away from. It takes more than financial literacy to get past that trauma. And the way your body neurologically reacts from a perceived threat versus an actual threat is the same. So that fight versus flight mindset is there. I would add, although I am not a trained therapist, I would add that even when it's not a threat, even when it's not the like survival mode part of your brain that's activated, the pleasure mode part can still be there. So if you grew up believing that anytime you like got good grades, you should be awarded with some, big fancy dinner. I don't know, Sizzlers might have been the the choice. Like back in the day, we really thought we were doing something when we went to Red Lobster and Olive Garden, and it took a while for us to learn. There's restaurants with a few more stars out there. But that pleasure, that reward recognition kind of piece of your thought process where you can say, I just got a promotion at work, or something as simple as it's the beginning of the month and I paid all my bills. And so now let me reward myself. And it's not coming from a place of survivor mode, but just a place of this is something that I experienced, this is something I understand. I think I should treat myself. And the decision to do that, even if you don't need to, even if you recognize I just paid my bills and I really don't have money to spend on like a retail therapy trip, but I'm still going to do it. So the importance of understanding that trauma and a therapeutic approach, Rakim's therapeutic approach to the three E's, which are exposure. That's the aha moment. You should celebrate that aha moment of, I realize there's trauma here and I need to fix it. I need to work on it. The education of saying, what can I do to get past this? What do I need to learn? In your case, understanding that to get to a home purchase, like what is a multi-unit home? What does that look like? Like, what is the financing? What neighborhoods do I want to be in? And then the execution and the importance of having community in execution. So it is easy to talk yourself down from a good decision when you're the only person that you see doing it. Especially if, depending on how the algorithms are working on your phone, you you start seeing targeted ads that make you think maybe this isn't it. So the
Mm-hmm.
importance of having community. And fortunately, Rakim offers all of those services. So supporting being able to get the exposure, to get the education, and then to be your rah-rah champion cheerleader through the execution. Okay, so for this last question I have, I'm going to give you a few examples to tee it up after I give you the question. The question is, what can you do if you recognize someone has financial trauma that you're connected to? And the context, the examples, I'm not saying you have like a friend who likes to go on trips all the time and she expects you to just pay on the trips because y'all know I like to travel. That's not a real threat. But perhaps you have these are real examples from clients I've helped, but honestly, I'm not sharing their name, protect their identity. But if you have parents who refuse to get health insurance and you're thinking, I'm going to need to take care of them, who's going to pay for these bills? You have a best friend who's always maxing out their credit card and they expect you for whatever reason to be Captain Save them and come in and help with bills. Or you have a partner, and a partner who you're with, this isn't some casual kiki on the phone. This is like y'all are living together. You're married. In some way, your finances are intertwined and your partner doesn't want to have a savings account, but you insist upon having one. And at some point you're going to need to use it. Like, how does that work? So what do you do if someone has financial trauma, if they have this mindset that is based on what they've experienced in their life and it's stopping the both of you from moving forward together? How should you govern yourself in those moments?
Yeah, great question. I think of two things in answering this question, right? There's boundaries, right? The establishment of boundaries, and more than establishing them, but sticking to them. And then there's values. And so, in determining what are your values financially, maybe that looks like saving, maybe that looks like just being responsible. financially, compared to this person that's close to you, whose values might be a little bit different, it's important to not project your values onto somebody else, because it's gonna end up in a fight, right? It's gonna end up in conflict. Helping to, or rather, understanding what their values are and helping to align their values to financial goals it's difficult work. It's work that I do as a financial counselor, but it is necessary work, right? So we talked about church earlier, kind of in a joking fashion, right? As the part of the study for the AFC, one of the questions is, what if you have a client who, so very similar to what you're asking, right? What if you have a client who um, doesn't believe that they can afford to budget, but consistently tithes 10% of their income at church, right? And so, as an untrained counselor, right, or a coach, I might say, well, you need to stop tithing until you can get your finances in order and start putting money aside for you. But what you do is you put them in a situation where they have this internal battle around what's important to them versus the advice that you're giving them. And so that resistance that you're introducing or that you're creating is setting them up for failure, because in their mind, tithing might be salvation, right? And you have to acknowledge that, because at the end of the day, what they believe is what matters. Where their feelings are is what matters. And so you are fighting an uphill battle and trying to change that. Whereas if you approach them from the perspective of saying, okay, how can we accommodate tithing as part of your budget so that you are still exhibiting positive behaviors financially, so that you are still adhering to this budget, but you're able to do the thing that is important to you? Or how can you reimagine what tithing looks like from a financial perspective or from a non-financial perspective? Maybe you're giving time instead of money, so that you have more money to then allocate towards the things that are necessary for yourself. And so once you come to an agreement around where their values are, bringing this back to your question as it relates to a partner, as it relates to a friend, as it relates to a parent, and helping to align those values for that person with their goals, it makes it a much easier conversation, because what you're giving them instruction on is important to them now. On the other end of that conversation, right, with the boundaries, right, some people are just stubborn. Like, some people are they're just going to do what they want to do, and it doesn't matter how much you want them to change or what your positive intentions may be for them. They're stuck in their own way. And that boundaries piece is important, because you don't want them to drag you down with them. And so maybe those boundaries look like, well, this is a situation that you're going to continue to put yourself in. Do not look at me as a resource to help save you, right? I'm not giving you money if I recognize that if you're just going to continue to repeat this process. Or I'm going to give you money on the condition that XYZ occurs with this money. And so those are difficult conversations to have. And I think that they're also necessary conversations to have. And so part of the establishment of boundaries is not just control or controlling somebody else, but it's honoring you in this equation, right? And so I think that's the approach that people should take when they're starting to establish those boundaries, particularly in those intimate relationships, is how do I honor myself in this situation while continuing to be part of this relationship? And so I love the example that you gave around saving. Maybe the partner doesn't want to save or doesn't want to do like kind of a communal saving thing, but you realize and recognize the value of saving. And so you start that process. And whether you are open about sharing, like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Oh, look, over 6 months, this is what I've been able to accumulate. Or you're secretive about that process, where you're like, you know what, like, this is my business. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. And I'm not by any means encouraging one or the other. But depending on, what your approach is, you're creating your own life raft for whatever the circumstances that may come, that will come in the future. And so again, just to summarize, boundaries and values.
I like that. And that goes beyond finance. In any relationship, the importance of knowing what you value, and knowing how to put those boundaries in place to say, this is what I can do. And if I have to go beyond this point, this is what I'm expecting of you. And this is the hard stop where I will not go beyond, like, this is all I can give. I think that is so important in any relationship, whether it's your supervisor at work, whether it's your friend, even your pets. Like letting them know, like, we're not going for a walk at 2 a.m. just because, you're barking at my door. Just the importance of having boundaries and values and communicating those. And I like what you said about not forcing the argument, like recognizing that by forcing your opinion and just saying this is law because it's my point of view, does not get to a solution. It creates the tension and the hostility that then pulls people further apart. But coming at it from a place of, let's try to figure out what that middle ground is. Let's figure out what each other's like non-negotiables are and work from that place of like, we're getting to a solution, not you have to sacrifice everything to do what I want. This
Yeah.
was good. I enjoyed it. Last but not least, where can people find you? Is there anything that you have coming up? Anything you want to share? Are you taking new clients? Give us all the good things to stay connected.
Yeah, you can find me pretty much everywhere at Rahkim Sabree. So that's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all the social medias. My website is rahkimsabree.com. My weekly newsletter called Overcoming Financial Trauma is rahkimsabree.substack.com until I change it. And so recently I realized, and this is me kicking myself in the head. Recently I realized that a lot of people don't know that I am an author. Surprise, right? Like I thought, so I published my second book in 2019 called Financially Irresponsible. And I guess between 2019 and 2023, I haven't been doing as good a job as I thought at continuing to put that book in front of people. So I am an author of a best-selling book on Amazon called Financially Irresponsible. I believe it has like 140 some odd reviews. If you go to the page, it's like a 5-star book. I wrote that book with the inspiration from Rich Dad Poor Dad and some of the other financial literacy books that often circulate in our community, but I didn't see me in those books. So I decided to be the representation, right? And now I'm seeing so many of our financial peers publishing books over the last year or two, and I love that. But yeah, like I'm not gonna say that I'm an OG, but Financially Irresponsible was published in 2019. So definitely check out Financially Irresponsible on Amazon. Because of this realization, and you are the first person that I'm sharing this with publicly, I am considering re-releasing the book as a new edition with added commentary, particularly around financial trauma, because back in 2019, I didn't have the vocabulary to describe a lot of this information. And so going back and just kind of making commentary on some of the ideas and the strategies that I talk about in that book at that particular stage in my life. I think I was 2019, I was 29 years old. Now I'm 33. And then also adding the knowledge that I've gained through the network and the communities that I've interacted with around financial therapy, financial trauma, financial psychology, and just kind of, I don't want to say legitimizing, but cleaning up some of the stuff that's out there. So it's an idea that I am very excited about pursuing. I don't know when exactly I'm going to do that, but definitely within the next couple of years, there should be a re-release financially irresponsible coming out your way.
Breaking news, people. Brr, brr, brr. Y'all know I like the air horns. Oh, the air horns. So that's so cool. Thank you. So look, listen. When the new version, the relaunch, the new edits come out, I like that you already have an idea of what that looks like, and we will put respect on your OG title, that you've been doing this. When that comes out, let me know. I'll be happy to bring you back, talk more about it. In the meantime, I'm going to put something together to give away a copy of your existing book because you're right, we do have a lot of peers in this space who are putting out books, and that's good. Like there's space for everyone at the table. But I like to help people get more followers, more audience, more engagement with their material. So I'm going to do a book giveaway so you can get a copy of Financially Irresponsible. And the details of how to do that are going to be in the show comments. So y'all look below to see and see what you need to do to get a free copy sent to you. It's gonna be one. Don't be greedy, y'all. It's gonna be one. It's a self-funded enterprise, like aside from the grants I receive. So that is it. So okay, we know where we can find you. We know you got a lot of great things coming up and continuing on. And with that in mind, any final thing you want to share with the audience? Any motivational, like if someone just had to go out today and say, what am I doing in the world? How can I make a better place in the world? How can I heal from this trauma? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I have a couple. I forgot to mention Forbes. I mean, you mentioned it a couple of times, but definitely check me out on Forbes. Type my name into the search bar. You'll see a couple of articles there. As far as motivation going out to this world, I didn't get to talk about this, but you said something that made me think about it, and so I'm gonna circle back to this idea of financial empathy that I believe Dr. Michael Thomas, professor at the University of Georgia, coined. He has a TEDx talk on financial empathy, but maybe it's a topic that's been circulating before him. But I'm going to give him all the credit. Financial empathy, super important. So when we're talking about recognizing financial trauma in other people, or not even just financial trauma, but recognizing behavior that maybe doesn't align to what it is that we think we know, right? Because we think that we know better, particularly as financial educators. It's super important to kind of get to the root of why they're making the decisions that they make. And some of that is just as simple as having a conversation. Within his TEDx talk on financial empathy, Dr. Michael Thomas talked about doing like volunteer tax preparing with a peer, and one of his peers tells a story about a customer who comes in who's going to receive a large return, and they ask the client, what are you going to do with this large tax return? And the first thing that the client says, I'm going to buy a big screen TV or a flat screen TV, something like that. And the initial response is one of like judgment, like, why are you going to buy this flat screen TV? Like, you should save it, you should invest it, et cetera, et cetera. All things that we all probably would say if we were in the same situation. And upon further inspection or discussion, what was revealed was that this individual was a parent, and they lived in a rough neighborhood, and they wanted the flat screen TV so that they can keep their children and their children's friends off the street. So they were going to take their return and buy this flat screen TV to create an environment that was safe for their children. And so when we look back at the reflex to judge based off of what we know and what we feel like others should know, having that financial empathy to understand what is the root behind the decisions that some people are making is super important, because maybe that was the best decision financially based off of that money for that family, even though it wasn't, investing in Apple or setting up the Roth IRA or paying down debt. It was a way to facilitate safety within the home and community. And so as you go out into the world and, we want to change the world and we want to share the knowledge that we've gained financially and otherwise, also remember, as we talk about boundaries, as we talk about values, as we talk about empathy, that everybody's situation isn't, on the surface, and that if we took the additional seconds that it takes to qualify why somebody is making the decision that they're making, or why they believe what it is that they believe, or whether or not this is the best situation for them without judgment, that we can have a much greater impact than if we sat on our high horse or in our ivory tower and saying, you should be saving your money. You should be investing your money. Why are you going to spend money on these liabilities when you can be buying assets, without realizing that decision could have saved her children or her children's friends' lives.
That is such a wholesome way to end this conversation. And I think it is the perfect way to end it, to say that with all that can go on with financial trauma, as you go out into the world, show financial empathy and compassion and understanding. I am Jay Stevens of Rich Like My Melanin. Our guest today is Rahkim Sabree. Thank you all for tuning in. There's plenty of good little sound bites and nuggets of information out of here. Y'all go out there and show some empathy to people.